Hi, I'm Michael.
And I'm Malcolm.
And welcome to On the Sofa. Today I want to talk about class planning. We get a lot of questions. In fact, we ask students to design classes when they're training with us, doing their teacher training programs, to show that they can really plan a balanced class.
I have to say, he didn't tell me it was class planning we were starting off. He got my head thinking on another topic. So now I'm thinking class planning. Go for it, you continue.
Everything always depends. When you're planning class, I mean, we say with beginner's class or foundation class, you've got an intermediate class. Sometimes it's limited on the moves you can put into that class. When we do our foundation course, we look at 15 movements. When we do our intermediate classes, we look at 25 movements. But really, it's difficult to put things into a box because everything always depends as to who's in front of you and what are you going to be focusing on that day. As we've talked about previously, you can make a whole class focused on breath. You know, it can be the same movements you've been doing, you're just changing what you're talking about. There is so much to think about when you're doing Pilates movements that really you can take exactly the same set of movements and put a whole different focus on that.
I mean, we do that all the time with themed classes. If I've been asked to do, especially when I travel to other countries, I'll often be asked, can you do a reformer session and make it about glutes and hamstrings? Or glutes and triceps? And I'll say, yes, of course. I'll do almost exactly the same movements, but I'll emphasize when the hamstrings are being working. I'll emphasize when the glutes are being toned up. I'll emphasize when the triceps are being targeted, which I wouldn't maybe have done in another class. Another one is Pilates for men. It's the same as Pilates for women. It's just that we get men only in the class, so there's a little bit less of that men versus women kind of competition. Is mostly in the men's head because the women know they can do Pilates better than many men, partly due to flexibility, but lots of other reasons.
But we have to remember, Pilates was designed originally for men.
So all Pilates is for men.
Exactly. We just loaned it to the ladies who actually do it much better.
But all Pilates was also meant for everyone because Joseph Pilates is on record as wanting people to be taught Pilates in school. So he designed it for himself and then applied it to men. But 100%, his goal was it was for everyone. It wasn't gender specific. So the men's classes are literally a way of getting men into an environment that they don't feel comfortable in doing this kind of movement or this kind of exercise.
We organize our classes into systems of pure Pilates when we're just doing the Pilates movements, and then within that we do have different levels, foundation level, more experienced. When we do our Pilates Plus, it's when we're bringing the small pieces of equipment, the mini balls, the bands, the rings, and then we have what we call the Pilates Fusion, where we're stepping outside the language of just Pilates and bringing in fascia work or some movements from the repertoire of the apparatus and bringing that into class. So we kind of organize our class that way. But even though I might have got a class in front of me and today is the mini ball, for example, I still think about who's in the class and what is it I'm trying to do with them that day. So I might have planned something in my head, although after teaching for many years, you kind of go on instinct rather than actually having on a sheet of paper. But we do realize that many new teachers need to find their way of teaching the method. Now, a huge part of this is obviously knowing the method yourself. Because again, when you know the method and your body knows the method, then you're communicating from a different place.
That's not an easy statement, though, to make, because as we all know, I still remember coming into this industry as I say, I was a suit. So I came in with no movement teaching experience at all. And any movement I had done was sports for pleasure, not competitive or anything like that. So for me, the idea of communicating a method, I hadn't been taught yoga, I hadn't been taught Chai Chi, I hadn't done anything specific. To be taught a method that had then a series of movements and then told, now create some classes, it is stressful, and I think any of us that teach teachers know it's stressful. Any clients, and I remember clients when we had a studio in Richmond, they knew when I was quite new to teaching group sessions with the studio equipment. They understood my nerves, and my anxiety was, I don't know how to manage this class to make it right. And I think that has never to be dismissed. It's a natural process, and if you get it wrong, I always say Pilates is one of the most forgiving classes. If you get it wrong, you made a bad decision in that moment, it didn't work, your plan clearly did. You can just say, you know what, this is not working today. Let's move on to something else. You can stop. It's not like there's music.
Let's come back to that later. Now, later might be 5 years from now, but it's not. You've decided at that moment it's not working.
Yes, yeah. And so you don't flog a dead horse. If it's not working, don't keep on fighting it. That's when you do get into the stress. That's when the client starts having problems and complaining and about this doesn't feel good. When you're trying to make it work. It could be that it's just them today, not listening to you. It could be that you today haven't communicated it clearly, but for today, move on. And that for me is one of the things with class planning. People get so fixed and rigid that they don't allow themselves to adapt. And they go, oh, I've forgotten what movement's next. Well, just pick a movement.
Now, Joseph Pilates has published his book. The movements are in a specific order, and there is a big school of thought that you shouldn't change that order. You should just teach the movements in the order he originally designed.
But then that doesn't work, because there's other movements that were taught in the studio to clients that are mat movements that weren't in the book. I'll give you an example of the can-can, the crisscross, there's another one. The clam, the butterfly. These movements do exist and are recognised and taught from a lot of the original groups of teachers down through. So they're not in the book, so how can it be that you just teach what's in the book? But if I'm a great believer in reading his own text, and he didn't want you to move ahead of yourself. If you weren't able to do something, you didn't just go on to the next movement and fail at that movement as well. There was a building upon your experience, and we call that a prerequisite. Before I can do this movement, I must be able to do this one reasonably well.
So the consideration is who's in the class, but then also what are you asking them to do with that movement? What is the loading? What is the overload? You know, which muscles are you focusing on to achieve that movement? And for me, when I'm dealing with people who are maybe not muscularly balanced, shall we say, there may be some muscles already working too hard.
That would be everyone.
That would be everyone I see, basically. But if you're working with the group of people, and again, it's different when you've got a one-to-one client in front of you, because with a one-to-one client, you can really look at that posture and decide, okay, this is what you need. And that's how working in the traditional Pilates studio with the apparatus was taught. The clients were given specific movements on each piece of apparatus, and it did vary. Sometimes it varied because that piece of apparatus you wanted wasn't free, and you had to give them movements on another piece of apparatus. But it always came down to who the client was. What is your goal, and what are you asking them to do by choosing some of the movements? So for me, my system is basically I consider the movement, and I think what movement's going to be best before or after, to either reduce the tension we've just created with the loading that we've done, or to prepare them for the movement following.
For me, when I'm not working off of a plan, that I love writing down plans for my own confidence sake when I'm going to, especially with the new groups. Michael laughs every time because whenever I start teaching, I don't work from the plan. Yeah. But the plan helped me feel confident that I could go in there and do something. And it was
definitely with what we've been doing on Zoom, it's easy to have a whiteboard behind the camera and you can have your plan there. So it's not about memorizing your plan.
But when I kind of, and excuse the term, wing it, you can't wing it if you don't have the knowledge behind you to wing it. That's one of the things.
Knowledge and also the understanding of the method.
Yeah, so that idea, you need to know what you're doing and what tools you've got to play with if you're going to wing it. But my structure around that was actually, I don't know if I think I've told you this before, is I would just look at what movement I've done in the spine. Have I done flexion? Have I done a long natural curved spine being challenged and developed? Have I done rotation, lateral flexion, extension? Have I said extension already? So yes, lateral. So have I done the planes of movement of the spine? And if I've just finished with lateral flexion and I think, okay, have I done my rotation yet? And I'll then think, well, I can do the rotation. Does the rotation work the same stress points as the one I've just done? No, great, that's the one I'm going to do. So that allowed me to create a class plan that when I'm finished, people would say, oh, that class felt really good, it felt very natural, it flowed nicely. And I can't even remember the order I did the class in because there wasn't a structure. It was me just thinking, what have I not done yet? I'll do that now.
And you could take one of those directions and focus on it. You could say today's classes are going to be all about extension, because in reality, that's what we all need, because we're spending so much time in flexion these days. But so coming from this, the function of the body, work outwards, know your movements. As I say, in traditional days, you had to be a client for at least a year in a Pilates studio. So you already knew your Pilates. And many times today, when people come to us to train, we require that they've done a certain number of classes, but you're often learning your Pilates as you're learning to teach it. And that's quite challenging, because you're still understanding how it should be in your body, and then trying to communicate it at the same time.
The example that I got coming into the industry was a lot of the people that we started working with, and I was lucky, I came from a training background, so teaching people to learn a new discipline was my background. It wasn't movement, but it was a new topic. I would see them coming with already experience theoretically in the industry, teaching maybe step. And then they would come to teach Pilates, and their skills that they relied on in their step teaching, their confidence around the music, the rhythm, the cueing ahead, that was all gone. None of those skills were being used, and they were asked to use a different set of skills. Underlying that was the ability to see, to be safe, to communicate to people. So the hardest thing I saw with those teachers was, I don't know how to structure this. I don't know how to frame this. And it's freestyle as opposed to structured. So always you've got to think, what am I bringing already? And when teachers come from that fitness environment specifically, or excuse me again, even dance, and they're suddenly in a place where they think they should be confident and familiar, and it's not, they have to fall back to their basic understanding of the work. And if you've not done enough practice of that work yourself, then yes, you're on catch up all the time. And I've been told many times in my disciplines before, you need to have this just a little bit more knowledge than the people you're teaching, and make sure you never claim to know something you don't. That little bit of knowledge is not a comfortable place to be if that's where you're teaching all the time. But the more you teach, your knowledge swells. It exponentially grows with experience. But the step teachers, I always remind them, and I say aerobics or step teachers, I always reminded them, you did your qualification, you did all your practice, you did your practice with your family and your friends, then you did your assessment, which was probably a really horrible experience, or if you enjoyed it, then the assessors went, well, here's what you need to work on. But that first class with a real group of people, no matter how much you're trained, is not a comfortable place to be. But 6 months later, it's a different story. And the 6 months later part has to involve, for Pilates teachers, doing it. Because if I teach an aerobics or steps class, I do it with them. If I teach a Pilates class, I'm not doing it with them properly. If you're talking and doing your Pilates, you're not doing it properly. If you're focused externally on your class, as you should be, you're not doing it for yourself. So your self-practice is key to being confident of what you're giving the class. And that's going to help your confidence with the class planning.
I use the example as well, when you go into a professional restaurant, the chef,
a professional restaurant,
as opposed to an unprofessional restaurant. Go into a restaurant.
Don't go into an unprofessional.
And it's a good. I meant to say a good restaurant. The chef hasn't got a menu book in front of him. And when you come to a training course, your manuals, that's your recipe book. The chef learns the recipes, of course, like we all learn our movements. But then when you're in the kitchen, and your studio is your kitchen, you're creating dishes. It can be spicy dishes. It can be more salads. It can be more general dishes. But you're creating dishes when you're creating class plans. And so you shouldn't have a manual there, relying on that. And that's getting the method into your body.
Using that analogy, I don't know what's going on with my voice today, guys. Using that analogy.
Talking too much?
Could be. Never worked, never happened before. But if you go into a restaurant and the chef's different that night, you know it. You normally
things
know
have changed.
Unless that chef, the lead chef, is very strict and everyone has to cook exactly the same, you'll know things have changed. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. I am trained by Michael 100%. I've had experience of many other people, but I've not been trained by anyone else. And then he's allowed me to train myself, and I bounce ideas off of him all the time. But if you go to a class with Michael for 3 months, and then I come in as his substitute, you are going to either say, well, that was a nice change, but I'm looking forward to Michael coming back. Or you might say, I quite like the way Malcolm taught the class. And if Malcolm's on the if I'm on the I'm talking third person, I'm going nuts here. If I'm in another part of the timetable, that person may say, well, I'm going to try that class as well. What we like is that the people do both our classes, because we do come in with almost a different focus on our class planning and how we communicate the method. And when we've got clients in the studio with the equipment, we love making sure that they're not rigidly just Michael's clients or my clients. They don't always respond initially too well to it, but over time, they really appreciate the difference, because it makes them have to think for themselves, and we challenge them both in different ways.
So you're never a substitute teacher.
Yes.
You're just a teacher with a different style. And that's ultimately what we want you to find, is your style of teaching. And yes, there are lots of websites. We have one where you've got all the classes on there you can look at. Pilates Anytime is another great website. There's sites out there where you can get ideas, but it has to come from an instinct. And you have to ultimately trust yourself on what you're teaching. And yes, it can go wrong. And as Malcolm said, we'll come back to that later. Can be a much different time.
Like, why did I choose that?
Why did I choose that movement today? But when you walk out of a class and you go, yes, that was a great class. That's where you evaluate. Okay, why was it a great class? If you and equally when you walk out of the class, go, whoa, that was wrong. Why was it wrong? Never blame the students. If I've heard teachers saying, oh, this class is so stupid, they just don't get it. It's not the students.
And Michael, you've always said to me, they don't sit outside a room saying, I'm going to make the teacher's life a misery.
Yeah, I'm not going to get it today. I've just decided I'm not going to get it. I'm going to make my teacher's life misery. They want to get it. It's always down to you and your communication, and maybe, as I say, the wrong movement choice. But we have to try things. This is not a fixed program. This is an organic program that you can adapt, you can change, you can modify, you can bring small equipment in to help. But don't always get reliant on that small equipment as being essential, because ultimately the honesty of this method is you and the mat. And, well, of course, your class. And let's say any class is a compromise, because you've got different people with different bodies. So it has to be more of a general program. So always look at who's in your class. You might have prepared the perfect class and then new people come to it.
Even some days of the energy they bring into the class means your class plan is not going to work.
And we're challenged, with everything we've gone through with lockdown, learning to teach on Zoom, it's limiting. Always make sure that, if you're planning your class, that you're giving also time to stop yourself and watch the students and see if it's working. Because again, we've got a bit of a disconnect with when you're teaching online. It's what we have to do, and we do it every day, but it's a challenge. So that also will come into your class planning is, how are you teaching? Are you teaching live or are you teaching online?
But even the class planning side of it, the directions of where you are in relation to them. I also remind teachers that your physical presence in a room with someone has a lot of power. And wherever you are, they want to be thinking and focusing on it. So you need to be interweaving among the class, not just sticking on 2 demonstration spaces. As soon as we went online, the problem there was our flow of class built around that concept was lovely, and it was all the class planning was all very clear and simple, and they went there and you moved. Suddenly that had to change for us with Zoom, and we had a conversation one day and I said, well, we're just going to have to ask them to turn the other way.
Absolutely, yes.
I want to see you from the feet to head angle, not from the back view or the front view. And you were like, very true. I use that word like. So suddenly it took us quite a few classes to work out, we need to ask people to move so we can see them, because we can't move to see them. And that way our class planning immediately was affected, because certain things didn't work and other things had to be brought in that we didn't use before. It's always fluid. If you walk out the class and it didn't feel right, you have to do, as Michael suggested, analyse what? Constructively. And remember, clients come wanting to enjoy it. So when a class leave going, oh, that's a great class, thank you very much. Yes, take it. You've done something that's kept your clients happy. But what you should think is, now, what could I improve on that I think I maybe didn't do as well as I could? don't pick everything in the class. And I always say it every time, if you're worried about your class planning, video your class. It's one of the best ways you can obviously with class permission, but you can watch and even just audio record teaching your own class and play it back and be the observer of your teaching to really self-analyze if your plan works. The feedback from the clients, as I say, they'll be positive to you. Even if they're not totally positive when they walk away to your face, they want to like you. They're there enjoying your company and they're grateful for your service, so they'll say nice things. But you can be a little bit more critical of yourself in a constructive way. Play it back, whether it's video or audio, and listen and do what you're asking the class to do, and you might recognize that went on too long. One of my classic mistakes, apart from talking too much, which is still work in progress, was the side bend. To start them off in the loaded position and then talk too much. By the time you get to the actual movement, their shoulder girdle is already fatigued. If they need the movement, it's already fatigued. If they don't need the movement, they're fine, they're happy there. But that's something so easily done that you do on the first side, but you don't do on the second side. So even just changing lefts and rights, this is my week of lefts, this is my week of rights that I start. Or February is my breath month, and March is my centre month, and April is going to be my shoulder girdle month. And it just gives you a way of changing your plan a little bit so that there is that tool to create more diversity in your class planning.
It is. I mean, we want the journey of the client and the journey of the instructor should be ongoing. And as I say, there are definitely more traditional schools out there that say just keep teaching the movements until they can do them. We believe that to help people get effectively working correctly, we modify, we break down, and Pilates can be one of the most adaptable methods I know on changing movements to fit the client's needs. And personal training is where we really adapt that.
And that's not dishonoring the method. Every piece of studio equipment out there that Joseph Pilates created and was continually adding and developing and changing, there's no one time that was the only version of the machine. But every piece of equipment was to help people do something they couldn't do on the mat on their own. It was to help them go further with the movement or get over a hurdle. So you are responsible for carrying on that concept for me with Joseph Pilates, which is you have to take charge for when you adapt something, when you change your plan, when you are responsive to the needs and the goals. The need of the client and your goals with that client, you have to find your route to that. So there is no one formula, there is no one answer, really.
No, so enjoy teaching your
That's
classes.
an emphatic no.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking, what did I say now that maybe it was a bit too strong?
No. Yes. Enjoy teaching. Find your way of teaching this method. You know, it doesn't matter which school you train with. Ultimately, you're a Pilates teacher. And your style of Pilates is why people are going to come to you. So if you want to teach traditional, teach 134 without changing it, absolutely, that's your style. But if you want to explore and think and learn, understand about the body, the fascia, the postures that we see in front of us every day, then just think, okay, this is not going to be as easy as just teaching a set of movements. This is going to be teaching the method. And all the traditional Pilates teachers I've worked with, which have been a lot, and I'm very lucky doing that, always teach the body in front of them. Teach to the body, don't just teach a set of movements. So I believe, after a long time of teaching this method, that that's the best way of doing it. And I make every class different. Not everything in the class, but I think, okay, what am I going to do today? What did I do last time with this group? Who's here? What do they need? Let's see how we can work it today. And hopefully it'll be successful.
We're still surprising each other with things that we've started to do that we haven't told each other. And Michael will then see a class that I've taught and he'll go, when did you start doing that? I like that. Or I'll see Michael doing something, why didn't I think about that? It's so obvious. It's like, that's part of being around other teachers. It's going to help you bounce ideas off and just check that you're on a path that you're comfortable with. But I would like to say just this thing. not an sprint here to get to a certain place. It is a long haul project that you're on if you're a Pilates teacher. And if you're a Pilates practitioner, it is a journey you're going with your body and the method. It doesn't have to be some biblical experience, but it is a thing that if you understand what you're achieving with your body, if your body needed what you're doing for it, and it's not simply maintenance of what you already have, you'll understand what the method will do for you. But as a teacher, you're walking hand in hand with the people down the path. You're not trying to push them, but don't let them pull you either. So you're the one with the experience and knowledge and training, and you're the one that can say, no, I'm not going to do that. And if they don't like that, then you maybe need to try a different style of class to mine. Don't compromise yourself to be pulled by the class who maybe are coming with a different mindset than you have. And also don't push people who are clearly not ready for being pushed. Because most of us, if we get pushed, what do? We either push back or leave.
So I hope you've enjoyed today's little chat on the sofa about class planning.
Yeah.
And again, not a short one because there's a lot to say on the subject.
We need to put a timer up saying 5 minutes only.
Yeah, really, cut after 5 minutes. Hope to see you again on another chat. As I say, if you want to come take class with us, we teach class every day online. If you want to see any of the classes, we have our training room on the website where you can look at our classes, and you get 2 weeks free if you're new to us. So join that and you can see how we teach and the class plans that we put out there.
And on our website, we've got lots of wonderful conversation interviews. Some of them more technical, some of them very informative for anyone who has a body, basically, but also for teachers as well. Just learning about other areas of this world that we don't encounter day to day necessarily with our Pilates. So they're all there for you. Please enjoy our website.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.